So I am with Darren Lipomi. He is the, correct me if I'm wrong, chair of the Department of Chemical Engineering here at
That's
University of
correct.
Rochester. That's right. Okay. So, and my goal with this is really to just talk to people doing science communication, period, or uh, scientists and researchers doing communication and doing it authentically, doing it well, in order to help others that are thinking they should talk about more things online, or they're hesitant to, and maybe need like a little something to push them, to be more comfortable with it. And I don't know. I'm excited to talk about it though. So Darren, we've talked about this before, but when you first started, the communications team wrote an article about you. It was in the news center. That's how I learned about your YouTube channel, because that was linked in there. And I remember clicking through and being like, oh wow, like I can't remember the language that was used in the article, but um I was thinking like, oh wow, they were right. Yeah, I think I saw something like 17, 18,000 subscribers, and you don't get to that point by just by happenstance. It's you have to be consistent. You have to provide relevant information to your intended audience, all that good stuff. So clearly, you were doing something right in that regard. But first, why? What was the thought process? I went back to some of your oldest videos, and I think they're like 8 years old or so. So, what was the purpose 8 years ago of starting a YouTube channel for you?
I had always been interested in video communication. When I was a kid, I used to have this PXL 2000 black and white video camera. It was made by Fisher Price, and I got that when I was in like first grade, and it would record 10 minutes on each side of a high definition audio tape. Believe it or not, there were differences between audio tapes. And so these were the expensive ones. And so I would basically make videos of my stuffed animals, playing out parts in Star Wars and Star Trek and stuff. And I always really enjoyed the stage, I guess, and communicating with an audience. And when I started to apply for faculty positions, I needed to say something smart about my teaching approach. And there was a zeitgeist toward active learning methodologies, and in particular, ways of getting video into the hands of students before they show up to class, and then you use the class time as for homework and independent projects and stuff, a so-called flipped classroom approach. And so in 2017, I had already been teaching traditional lecture-based courses for 5 years. And so I thought, well, I've got this critical mass of stuff. I'm going to record it all. I'm going to take 1 year and record every single lecture. There are going to be like 75 of those. And then I'll use them in my courses going forward so that I can use the class time for a flipped classroom. And that was the genesis of the academic content on the channel. The other half of it is professional development content, and that arose from the fact that I was running the graduate student and postdoc scholarly and professional development talk series. We called them the grad talks. And when I couldn't find a speaker to give a particular topic, I would give the topic myself. And because I was already doing the work with the course lecture recording, I just turned the equipment on myself for those talks too. And then I started to upload those. And that was about the same time.
So when did you start noticing, so the intended audience seemed like at first was just people that were going either thinking of taking your courses or then taking your courses, and then, like you said, being able to use class time for other things. So when did you start noticing others that, like kind of taking an interest in what you were doing?
Yeah, so, clearly if I had just wanted it to be the UC San Diego audience, that's where I was before I was at Rochester, I would have made them the links private or at least unlisted and sent them out. But I guess I was, I don't know, being a little vain and thinking these might actually be useful outside of campus. And so I made them all public. I did the absolute minutest due diligence as to whether or not I was allowed to send, UCSD content outside. And I remember I asked my dean about this, and the only thing he cared about was, is it branded? And I said, yeah, in the topic description, it says UC San Diego, but I added a little watermark. I've since taken it down, but for that time I did have a UCSD watermark, and I think they got their money's worth, which is to say it was all free, because there were a number of students who enrolled in the degree program Nano and Chemical Engineering because they said that they saw something that I made on YouTube. So it was a pretty good marketing tool.
That's interesting. I wrote a note here to ask you about permissions, since you were recording lectures, and for folks that haven't seen it and are listening, it's pretty much, or at least most of the ones I've seen, right, it's like a one shot camera on you teaching, right? Like, you don't see students or anybody else really in the class. So I'm guessing there weren't a lot of permissions there, but yeah, so that was really it. You talked to your dean,
Yeah,
you said, and it was like, yeah, brand it.
I'm sure that if I had gone straight to the marketing department and asked them, they would have told me no. Okay, I'm not sure, but I think they would have been nervous, let's say. They would have been nervous.
Sure. Well, you mentioned, we talked just quickly about the the look, and you've pretty much stuck with the sort of raw, unfiltered, minimal editing content. And I know, like myself, I used to get caught up, and still do, on like, well, I'm not going to do anything on YouTube until I get a nice camera, or I'm not, I need a microphone, or like, it's going to take me so long to edit this stuff. Like, I just don't have time right now. But, you skip a lot of that stuff, and it's you haven't needed it, right? It's become sort of part of, that's the look. And we were talking not too long ago at a meeting of podcasters around the university, and I think you mentioned that is kind of the part of the reason for the following you have, is because of like that authentic feel, right? I mean, is that just always how you've done it, or is it intentional, or both, or is it just because you wanted to get stuff out there and that was what it was going to be?
Yeah, it all started off as laziness. I think at first, when I was just like, oh, I could put this online with all the ums and the ahs and the non-words and the awkward pauses, and without the music, or without, well, not the music, there's no music, so without music and graphics, and because I didn't have time for it. I mean, I started doing it, I was already a tenured professor. I was teaching and running a research lab that had X number of $100,000 a year and research grants and so on. And yeah, I didn't have multiple hours to do the editing and so forth. But then I think one of the reasons why the channel started to be successful, to the extent that it can be with the niche audience that I have, is that it is raw and unfiltered. Because I think that the editing and the production values subliminally tell the reader that they're seeing a curated version of the facts. And if you don't have any of that, if you just turn the camera on and start talking, then you don't have that premonition in the back of your mind that, hey, this is the outward facing brand image that the organization wants to show you. No, it's not that. It's somebody, me in this case, who lives in this milieu, and I'm just going to start talking and telling you how it is.
And I think more and more now, like the younger generations, sort of, especially the ones coming up into their undergrad years and graduate school years, I feel like they're quick to recognize those kinds of things. Like they see that now just based on growing up with social media and influencers and all this stuff. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you can pick out a branded or a video that an institution owns versus an authentic raw one in a second now, especially that audience.
Yeah. If they are curating the image that well, they're probably also curating the facts. Whether they are
Yeah.
or not, that might be the judgment.
So how do you? And I think looking at your videos, a lot of the content themes that you talked about that were in place at the beginning are sort of still in place now. Seems like you're talking about a lot of the same things, but how do you come up with content to post now, and what seems to resonate the most these days?
Coming up with ideas now is a bit more difficult than it used to be. I used to, well, one, because I've taken up a lot of the space. I saw on LinkedIn or X the other day that someone said if you can think of a topic about administering an academic research and teaching program, Darren Lipomi has covered it somewhere on his channel, and we're about 250 or so, almost 250 videos in at this point. And so I've trodden a lot of the ground already, which is one of the reasons why it's becoming more difficult. But when I was doing the seminar series for our student success office, the grad talks, that is, there was a deadline because I had to have it ready by the second Friday or every other Friday in a semester, or maybe I was teaching a course. So some of my best, more recent content, like best how I feel about it, was done during a course that I taught called Transfer Year Experience, which is tools for community college transfer students coming in as effective juniors in their four-year college experience. And so I had to focus, really think about my audience and what sorts of resources they would need coming in at specifically that level. Most of the other content that I'm producing, which is about scientific writing, how to give a talk, how to work with a difficult colleague in a lab, how to apply for a grant, the intended audience is either broad or focused, but within a broad range. This was an area where I really had to try to get into the mindset of a community college transfer student.
Yeah, and as you were talking about that, I was thinking about like an interview I just did for our SMD podcast with. She had just defended her thesis for a PhD and now is going into a postdoc position. And she was, the sort of the theme of the interview was just the postdoc search process and how she went about it and what it was like. And I feel like, though, even if now that we've talked about that topic, I can't feel like I can't talk about that topic anymore because who knows what that process will look like a year from now, or even like, and I feel like I did have that conversation probably 2 years ago with somebody else who wasn't in this climate that we're in, we'll call it that, or, with everything going on in the scientific research medical world. So, even though you talk about a subject one time, that doesn't necessarily mean it won't be relevant again because times change.
The context is always changing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that's one thing to keep in mind too. If you're think about, you don't have things to talk about. It's like, well, just because you've posted about it once or somebody else has posted about it too, that doesn't mean your story isn't unique enough, or your the way you went through a particular thing isn't worth telling.
Right. And I generally shoot for 45 minutes on a topic or so, and that's completely arbitrary. That's just how long I can keep a certain level of energy up, at least how I perceive that I can. But it doesn't mean that you've exhausted scientific writing. I mean, I could talk
Right.
for 25 hours about how to write a paper.
One in doing some trainings, and not necessarily formal trainings, but just talks with smaller groups of graduate students in the biomedical sciences, things that come up a lot are like just the worry about response from an audience, on especially on social media, which is fair, and just being in academia, or just maybe it's imposter syndrome. They feel like others out there will be able to prove them wrong. But do you feel like pressured in any way to, this goes into a few different questions. I guess first, do you ever worry about backlash from your audience? Is that something you think about before posting anything, especially today?
I think I have to worry about backlash, but I'm surprised at how little backlash I have been the recipient of. Some of the most prominent cases. One time, I failed to attribute the invention of the alkane thiolate self-assembled monolayer on coinage metals to the appropriate people. I put George Whitesides on there, and I should have had Alara on there, and I'm sorry, and I published a correction, and so that was probably the one that I felt the worst about, because it's an actual scientific thing, like misattribution. No one ever wants to do that as a scholar, and I'm still a scholar, such as my skills are in scholarship. There was some I received backlash one time for the treatment of one of my papers in the public press. So in the popular press, we had this glove that had sensors on it, and one of the applications that my student chose was it can take the finger spelling alphabet and put the letters up on a screen. Now it wasn't intended as an accessibility technology for the deaf community, and there were some, but I understand why. Like, what are these engineers who didn't have a deaf person on their team doing this thing for? And yeah, that was embarrassing, and I was short-sighted and so on to have this project go with me being unaware. And so we did publish a correction. At one point, The Atlantic magazine published a story on the whole thing, which was not why I wanted to be covered in The Atlantic, for the first time in my career, but that was some form of backlash, but it wasn't about my YouTube or podcast content. Mm-hmm. YouTube and podcast are kind of interchangeable to me. I take the best content from YouTube and put that on the podcast, but a lot of what I do has graphics and things, and it doesn't translate too well, but most of it does, and even if it has graphics, sometimes I put it on the podcast. So there have been some other cases. I think I was more likely to get backlash for little quips that I put on the platform formerly known as Twitter. There was one time, and mainly it's when you tweet something that has some negative slant, or something that's a little cynical, or if you're punching down. And I one time I kind of stupidly said something about it was what I thought clever, but a way that PIs often get emails from people that we can't possibly support in the lab. If we took everybody who applied to the lab, we'd have labs of 500 people, and there's just no resources. So I tweeted a quip about this boilerplate that I that I kind of write. I try to write a different email to everyone, but I can't really do that. And someone said it's very discouraging to see someone of your stature, be so heartless or something. And I felt really bad about that. So I deleted that tweet right away. And then one thing that I did more recently, this is probably like 3 years ago, which strikes me now as quite douchebaggy in retrospect, as people were posting these like career timelines. And originally, the original intent was you're never too old to to learn. And at age 39 I did whatever, and I just did saw a bunch of these, so I just did mine. And people like, you're bragging and you're being such a bro, and humble bragging. Thankfully that word's not used so much anymore, because I don't think there's any distinction between humble bragging and bragging, but there we are. So I mean, backlash, YouTube, no, it's pretty positive, much more positive than the reception that my work gets from the typical grant reviewer or paper reviewer, where it's, just as a baseline, 50% negative, right? 50% critical.
But that's, I mean, I think going to be helpful for others to know, though, that, of course, at this level too, it's just something you think about and have to, of course. It's just kind of the nature of the platforms we use, I think. But you also said too, like, you were more likely to get response when you had a certain tone or something, or in a tweet. And if a researcher is publishing, they could just talk about their work, right? And talk about the data that they're seeing, and yes, that could also get backlash. But it's not that they would, you don't have to put an opinion in it necessarily. It's fine if you do, but you can also share facts that you're learning, and it could be that, right? I mean, that could be it.
Yeah, if you can connect it to somebody's reality. But I published a LinkedIn thing today about the absolute most obscure topic ever. We just had a paper come out, and it's literally a polymer that's flat could either twist like this, like an axle, or it could twist like a book. And most people who had not considered how dyes and semiconducting polymers like twist never would have thought of that in their life. They have no reason to know why it's important. I expect that LinkedIn post to get very little engagement. I feel like I have to do it because I'm proud of the paper, and
Sure.
You got to do it. And also some people are looking at that, like grant reviewers and so on. They're like, okay, Darren Lipomi's lab is still being productive, even though he's like a popularizer or whatever. And so there's still some scholarship happening there. There's still the chops are still working. But yeah, I don't expect much engagement from a pure like scientific result.
And that's okay too, to utilize your social channels as kind of a running portfolio, right? I mean, that's at the same time. I mean, it's, yes, you're talking about a specific topic in science, but it doesn't always have to be like controversial, or it could just be like, this is a cool thing we did, and I'm proud of it, and that's it. Yeah.
Yep.
So
yeah, and actually, in places where I think there's, how do you get people? How do you offer those facts to people who are going to like vote and make a difference?
Mm-hmm.
Because most science communities just follow each other, and there's very little leakage out into the mass market
Yes.
or mass media.
So like you said earlier, you kind of have to relate it back to, or make people care, make people feel something about it, if that's your goal. Right? If to make a difference in that way. How do you, a lot of the time we also hear like, that just time is a factor, and creating content for LinkedIn or posting on X is just time consuming, and it is, especially when you start to think about all of the avenues: YouTube, LinkedIn,
Yeah,
website,
especially
whatever.
now with the implosion of Twitter.
Yes.
We were all there 2 years ago, and now no one's there. Okay,
No,
some people are there,
and
but it's
well, it's yeah, and engagement is going down like crazy, and that's a
and
whole
it's
other
pay to play too.
totally. But time comes up a lot. Like I don't have time to do these things, and yes, I mean, totally valid, especially if you're thinking about every place you could potentially publish. I always like tell folks, like, if you could just, yeah, first I guess you have to think about your goal, and do you want to just build your professional portfolio? Are you trying to influence decision makers? That all is going to kind of influence where you spend your time, but like you have to pick one medium and do it well, and then it becomes a lot more manageable. And I also say too, like, say you're on LinkedIn, for example, like, you don't being on LinkedIn and building a personal brand or presence on that platform doesn't always involve creating posts. You can comment on other people's stuff and congratulate them, thank them, give an insight into their work, or reposts people that you follow. That's all relevant engagement on a platform like this, and less time consuming. But how do you balance creating content with research, teaching, mentoring, all that stuff you do in your role?
I try to consolidate tasks. So if somebody wants to interview me for, say, a community hour for the American, like the student chapter of a professional organization, I'll ask if I can record it and I'll post that. So this was quite popular during, it was popular to have these Zoom kinds of meet and greets with faculty during COVID. And
Yeah.
so I did a lot of them, and it was also easy to record it. In When you have in-person meetings, it's more presumptuous and intrusive to like bring recording equipment to it. So in recent cases, like if I just look back at some of the recent content that I've produced, it's been like a compulsion to produce an episode on a particular topic, and I just can't do anything else until it's done. So I'll go on a walk in the morning and I will dictate the script to my phone, and it won't be a complete script. It'll just be bullet points. One of the nice things about the ChatGPT app is that you can have it arrange a bunch of word salad into organized points. Where is that organization better than I would have come up with on my own? Maybe not, but it took less time.
Way faster.
Way faster. And now I have a series of bullet points. It's my work, but I did get some curation help by means of technology. And then I have something that I can kind of riff off of in front of a camera. I did a few episodes like driving in my car that turned out okay, but I stopped doing that in large part because it took too much. Like, I don't like to edit at all, but when I'm at a four-way stop, I need to stop talking or I'm going to cause an accident, right? Because I need those neural pathways for, something that is of corporeal importance.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that though, because I love that you mentioned ChatGPT, or just another way of saving time. I did that. I think I saw somebody on LinkedIn who was talking about, like, he creates a lot of content around working from home as a dad, and he was gonna leave, and him and his wife were going away, leaving the kids with grandma and grandpa. He wanted to give grandma and grandpa a schedule of what the kids did for dinner, bedtime, that whole routine, and instead of typing it out, I mean, he spoke into ChatGPT, said this is, like you were saying, just like kind of word salad and just chatting into the phone, no real organization in mind, and then it was like, can you put this into an organized schedule for me to print out and give to, and I was like, oh my God, that's genius. Like, and I've done that a couple times since then. So yeah, utilize the technology. Like going, we all should get out for a walk once in a while. If you have an idea, go, bring your phone with you and just speak. And it's amazing. Like, yeah, I'm not very good at just going on the fly. Like I have to have at least an outline, and I don't like to have a word for word script, but I like to have something. But like you said, it takes a lot of time to write an outline, like on a particular topic you want to talk 30 minutes about. So having stuff like that is just, it's made it a lot easier.
Absolutely. I had traveled to, I think my count is 26 countries in my, mostly for work trips. And I had never been to the UK. I've never even been on a layover at Heathrow. And we're going this summer, and I have no idea what's there, beyond the Tower of London and so on. And so I dictated some stuff to ChatGPT about, two parents in their early 40s and then a daughter who's 6, and the kinds of things she's interested in and we're interested in, and we have 10 days. Give me a mock itinerary. And then I sent that to a travel agency, and then they kind of, they did a lot of work around the edges, but much of it is picking and is refined based on this conversation with ChatGPT. So there are some non-work efficiencies you can build into your life.
For sure. So, I'm looking at your YouTube channel now, and I notice some of the more recent videos. I see research funding as national capacity building. Do you really need a PhD anyway? Talking about the cuts to federal grants for science and engineering research in universities. A couple more like that. What's the real purpose of science research? We're in a time where we hit on earlier, science is regularly questioned, politicized. How do you, since it's, I'm assuming that some of these videos were just kind of a way to get sort of your response to all this out there.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think scientists or researchers can or should they respond to this through communications?
Yeah, how much time do we have? I have a few different reactions. I struggled a little bit in the decision to start talking about current events. I am speaking not only as a principal investigator on federal grants, but also as the administrator of an academic department in a program that I really want to grow. I want us to get more grant funding and increase our research productivity. That's part of the reason why I was brought on board. And yeah, I don't want to jeopardize our our ability to garner federal grants. That said, federal grants are not the only way that a university grows in prestige and impact and effect on students and the world. One of the reasons why academia has such low overhead rates is that the overhead is subsidized by student tuition, by endowment payouts, by current use gift funds, by sports, by real estate investment income, by hospital revenue. And so if you look at University of Rochester, we have one pie for the academic portion, and it's, say, very roughly a quarter tuition dollars, grant dollars, gifts, and auxiliaries. Then hospital revenue is another 2 to 3 additional pie charts that are all one source, which
Yeah.
is hospital services. We also have a ton of smart people on campus who really want to be trained in the form of undergraduates. And undergraduates are amazing researchers, especially at U of R, especially because we have relatively small classes and we can pretty much guarantee in chemical engineering that anyone who wants a research experience can have one. And they can't put as much time in as a graduate student or a postdoc, but they can really put in the time they can put in can be quite impactful. We are also running the risk under the old model, or the model that may survive the current administration. We don't quite know what the outcome is going to be. That we produce a lot of PhDs, and PhDs are also, it's also kind of hard to get a job as a PhD, especially on the biology and physics side of things, and any chemistry that is on the bio side of the continuum. And is this anyone's fault? I don't know. It's an artifact of the way the system has been built over the last 70 years, but it has produced this arms race. It's produced of education. A 5-year postdoc, is you need a 5-year postdoc in certain fields. And after a postdoc, you need to get a research scientist position because you're a postdoc so long they can't even call you a postdoc anymore legally. It's all this arms race of training and more training and more training and more training and low pay and low pay and low pay. So some of it is based on the expectation that PhD training pays you. It's cheap. It has a negative cost to the student, at least monetarily. I'm going to get some, speaking of blowback, there's going to be some blowback for that comment. And so if there were fewer, maybe they could actually get paid what they deserve, which is to be on the level of a doctor or lawyer, and not much less than the median doctor or lawyer to be a PhD scientist. So these are some reactions. Another reaction is I'm embarrassed for us, for me and my colleagues as scientists to allow ourselves to be so vulnerable to shifts in public opinion. If what we do is so important, how did we allow ourselves to be decimated by this utter stupidity happening among the leadership? Federal granting agencies are the most successful venture funds in history. I mean, it's not just the money that comes out of, you spend $1 on research. What that means is you're spending $1 on, some of that goes to somebody's rent, some of it goes to custodial work, some of it goes to this person, this person, this person. It's stimulative. It has a snowball effect, and then there's also the long-term outcome of the research. Maybe it starts a company, maybe there's a patent that gets licensed, maybe it's just a paper in a scientific journal, and that forms an idea that is then turned into $1 billion product at a company. And it's pretty cheap. I mean, scientific research is, roughly 1/10 the size of the defense budget. And so how did we allow it to to be abused in the way that it has been? How did we make ourselves so anti-resilient that we can't take this shock to the system when there are so many smart people already on campus? There are so many other ways to generate revenue, and we just allow, some people who don't care or are misinformed to make these decisions.
So how do we, respond to stuff like that through communication then? Is it just through continuing to promote the work or opportunities or everything you hit on there?
All of the above,
Yeah.
I think. I
Yeah.
think that scientists tend to be a little bit, they're averse to public speaking. There has long been a deeply held value among scientists that being a popularizer is a bad thing, where you're not pure. Like, oh, Richard Dawkins hasn't published a real paper in 30 years. And his position for a while at Oxford was professor for the public understanding of science, which actually sounds ridiculously elitist. and, like, and part of that is our problem too. I've said some pretty ridiculously elitist things in this conversation, and sorry about that. But I think there's a I think if it, certain groups say, well, if only there was a Joe Rogan of this in this area, then we would solve such and such a problem. If there was a publicly funded YouTuber, podcaster, then that had some amount of professional success, but really spoke in a plain way about how the science is actually done, as opposed to sort of wowie and borderline conspiratorial sort of undertones. And there are certainly scientists who are doing that, and like looks maxing and clickbaity titles, and like that, and then it gets more polished, and then you have the whole thing in your head about if this much is polished, then the turds they're spewing are also polished. And so there are some folks like that in the the podcastosphere, and so I don't know. I'm coming at this from a bit of a different angle, because I don't think the role that I'm playing is more like a Bob Hope entertaining the troops kind of thing. Most of my audience, I think, are other scientists.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm not really trying to sell the most recent longevity, life extending, snake oil to, unsuspecting millions on Spotify.
Yeah.
I'm talking directly to scientists, so I have a bit of a different niche there.
And I can't remember it. Oh, it's in an upcoming podcast conversation for the next step. One of our medical doctors who did a residency here, I talked to him actually about science communication, and he writes some amazing pieces on sort of his experiences as a pediatric cancer doctor. And so, we kind of talked a little bit about that, but he made a great point, and like, he is at the end of his career almost, been at this for 30 plus years, and has a level of comfort saying things in his writing that, no grad student will have, because understand, and that is totally valid, understandable.
No one can hurt him, right?
Yeah. Experience with experience comes confidence to say certain things, and I'm sure especially as you get to the end of your career. But I mean, is there any so I think all that to say it is valid with the graduate trainees who are hesitant to put themselves out there in any way, shape, or form. Do you have any we may have already touched on it, but any particular advice you'd give to folks like that?
Yeah, I think if you can make up a lot of ground in the information environment just by posting just the facts. Um, and try to go a little bit beyond check out my paper on da 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 da. You know, tell a story about like we found this because originally the petri dish was dirty or something, and I don't know. I'm making this up, or
Yeah.
you know, a little bit of an origin story for your work, and don't think that just because you publish one LinkedIn post about it, that that's all there is to say about it. And also, if you post it again on LinkedIn, even though your paper came out a week ago, people will still think it's brand new because they're seeing it in their feed for the first time.
Yeah.
And then post about it once a week for a month. And as you mentioned, there are more than one way to engage on LinkedIn. You can comment on other people's work. You can repost and comment. These aren't things that, you know, people don't know, but they don't, you know, you don't have to be the OP.
Yeah, I think any way that you can humanize, I guess humanize is the right word, your work, right? And I think that's what the doctor I was just referencing does so well, is he just brings a level of it just shares like the human element of being a doctor, and he's like also a dad. So he wrote a great article about, you know, so many patients that come in, or the parents of those patients are always asking him, well, what would you do if it's your kid? And he wrote about that, and it really, like, you know, okay, yes, he's a doctor, but geez, he's also a dad who struggles with these decisions and has to think and puts that hat on sometimes too. And it's like, oh, and you're more likely to react to that or respond to that and feel something from that. So any way you can humanize it.
Yeah, the most popular video that I ever produced, just 10 times more views than any other, is my struggles with not being able to swim until I was in my 20s. And I think that's the only video like it on the internet, where most videos about for people who are afraid of the water, they're like, you know, you got to make this shape when you pull and the crawl, like, no, way upstream, pun intended, of that. Like, what? How do you become not afraid of drowning if you're ankle deep in like 6 inches of water, or in a puddle that's a max of 6 inches?
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with his. I honestly forget his full name because I'm a new follower, but he goes by Dr. Knock online. There was a Stat News article about him. I can't remember if he wrote it or I think they just featured him. But he is I forget, he has a PhD in a biomedical science and started creating content around sort of debunking myths and combating misinformation, and he's done well. And he said in the article, though, like, despite all the science that he talks about, all the content he puts out, one of the things that he'll always remember is he was doing like an Instagram Q&A, a live Q&A at one point when those were popular. I think it was in the midst of COVID, and he was taking questions about vaccines and stuff. And then at the end of it, he said, all right, well, I got to sign off now. I got to go make my wife some dinner. I'll see you guys later. And somebody responded to that and was like, I wasn't sure whether or not to trust you before this, but for whatever reason, when you said you had to go make dinner for your wife, like, I instantly wanted to follow and trusted you. So it's like, it's amazing.
And you don't get that with all the frilly music and
no, you don't.
The super nice fades and stuff. Oh, I hate to say it. I thought you were gonna say, I thought you were gonna say that someone said something like sexist about like why are you cooking dinner or
Oh,
something,
I wouldn't doubt that. Yeah.
and then you saw all the and then what was I even talking about for an hour?
Yeah.
Because there was this phenomenon recently, and I hate to put a timestamp on our conversation, but where Mark Rober, who's an amazing scientific popularizer on YouTube, had that competition between the the self-driving features of two different cars, and one of them was a Tesla, and saying that that cameras don't work as well as lidar and so on, and the Tesla didn't do as well, and there was this huge debate about whether or not he was in the right mode and the proper controls and everything. And some of the criticism was scientifically motivated, but some of it was pure, like, the Musk fans or whatever, get. And it was interesting. You can't even with enormously popular platforms, there are always going to be people who are going to take issue with something you said or something you did, and some of that is very tribal and inevitable.
Yeah,
And statistical.
A whole other podcast for somebody else to discuss at another time is just the world of social media commenting and the zero regulation and the way people can say whatever they want without any repercussions whatsoever.
But that's related to backlash too. I mean, yes. I don't think that in science we're immune from it either. We often fall into camps, even when it comes to our pet theories and so on, that that maybe you should not be building your solar cells with the light absorbing part facing the bottom. Maybe you should be building it with the light absorbing part facing up. And there's a whole thing about that. And that sounds to me like the Dr. Seuss Butter Battle book. And that's another reason for people to get tribal and to have backlash, in a SciComm context.
Well, Darren, I only have one other question for you. This has been great. Just want to know what's next for you and your podcast and your YouTube channel. Any particular plans, or is it just as stuff comes up that you want to talk about, you'll share it, or what's going on there?
I'm writing a book which is analogous to. I'm working with a professional writer. The book is analogous to Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain, and the goal is to humanize the art of scientific research,
okay,
and to serve as a bit of a kind of policy manual on background for people that make decisions, to see how scientific progress actually gets made through the eyes of somebody who relatively recently went through the whole educational system, had some amount of success, such as it is in as a principal investigator on federal grants. And I have pretty high hopes for this project. It's a big financial investment on my part, and I'm trying to get some broad distributorship for it once it's ready, and that's what's next. I plan on discussing these themes more and more, the existential side of these themes more and more as I progress.
That's exciting. And yeah, I think I see a lot now about like writing or like there's like a concept in content marketing called building in public, where basically, like, if you're writing a book, like share it, like in public, and talk about it. So hope to see some of that content on your YouTube channel in the near future then. And would love to. Can't wait to see the book when it's ready.
I mean, I did do a book myself with my co-author Robert Ramsey, Introduction to Nanoengineering. You know, if you have a spare $100 to spend on a highly niche textbook, you know, your listeners should be aware. Great beach reading. This one I'm working with somebody.
Well, best of luck on that, and thank you so much for your time. I think a lot of this will hopefully resonate and be relevant for our trainees thinking about, you know, communicating their science and their work. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. It was a pleasure.